Abortion is starting to heat up the Republican primary debates as Ron DeSantis and Donald Trump, well, it's mostly Trump taking shots at DeSantis. I think DeSantis has kind of taken the posture of not maybe going to say too much directly at Trump necessarily too much, but it seems as though the fact that Ron DeSantis signed a 6-week abortion ban has become a big touch point in the elections. And this raises the question, which we've talked about on the show quite a bit, Jonathan, of, okay, Roe is overturned now. It's a new ball game. Legislatures can pass laws to limit abortion now. So what are we going to do? What, and by we, I guess I mean the pro-life movement politically in general. And I think one of the things that we have to decide now is that we can't just elect presidents. The choices are much more varied now as far as what we're looking for in a president. Before, basically, all a president had to say was, I'll nominate justices to overturn Roe v. Wade. And we're like, all right, well, it's the only thing you can do, more or less. I mean, there's some legislation, national pro-life legislation you could do, but for the most part, it was just, what kind of Supreme Court justices are you going to nominate? Well, now we have the actual ability for Congress to write and pass laws regarding the question of abortion. So Ron DeSantis passes this law in Florida banning abortion after the 6-week point of pregnancy, a heartbeat bill.
Right.
President Trump criticizes that and says that is too harsh. I think he used that language, that it was too harsh. And he also sort of promoted the idea, though, that abortion legislation should be left to the states, which is what DeSantis did. He passed a state abortion restriction. Anyway.
And John, the hilarious thing, I just have to point out there.
Yeah.
You don't see Trump, even though it would be well within his normal animus and vitriol against Brian Kemp, you don't see him attacking Brian Kemp for passing a heartbeat law in Georgia.
Yeah, Georgia passed a heartbeat law several years prior that finally now has come into effect because Roe's overturned.
You don't see him attacking Mike DeWine, who passed a similar law last year in Ohio.
Yeah, exactly.
You don't see him with similar types of situations in, Texas has a law that is almost essentially banning almost all abortions
completely.
In Texas
Yeah,
right
and he's
now.
not really criticizing them.
No.
Yeah. So I think there. So where does candidate Trump actually stand on this question? And I think it's a really important question, which is, I think it's an important question for people running for president. I think it's an important question for someone running for House of Representatives or Senate. What kinds of abortion limiting legislation do you, as an alleged pro-lifer, what do you actually support? And this is the kind of question that you couldn't ask when Roe v. Wade was on the books, because the Constitution said abortion had to be legal, so passing legislation wouldn't do us much good. But now we've gone from the theoretical to the practical and actual. So there seems to be very much maybe two camps. The one camp is what I'm going to call, Rich Lowry from National Review, we went to a talk that he gave recently. He's the editor of National Review Online. He gave a talk where he discussed this, and he said, I think a lot of Republican politicians are going to retreat to a very unprincipled federalism, as he called it, which is federalism is the idea that having a strict sense of the federal government can do this and only this, and state governments have to do this and that, and we have to have federal government should not infringe basically on stuff that is proper to the states, which has been a long-standing kind of conservative critique of the expansion of the federal government since the New Deal. And at the core of a lot of the modern conservative movement.
Which I will say, John, not to get too deep into the legal nerds. I know people have been dying for us to discuss Wickard v. Filburn on the Right to Life Radio podcast. But it's one thing if you talk about that, if you're talking about the 10th Amendment and everything, if you're saying, well, maybe we should allow each state to regulate housing policy. Or we should allow them to regulate, in the case of Wickard v. Filburn, the sale of wheat, or a case that just went to the Supreme Court, how pigs are raised and sold for pork.
And how California regulates the sale of pigs and how that impacts all the other states.
Yes, I mean, that's those are all things that you can have some very legitimate discussions about.
Yeah.
But the idea of maybe we should allow each individual state to regulate how and when they kill human beings.
Who is allowed to be legally murdered through private means? Yeah.
That seems like that might run afoul of, I don't know, the 14th Amendment,
the
perhaps?
Constitution, possibly, yes. So, and that's the thing. Even if it didn't run afoul of like the 14th Amendment protections of life, liberty, and property, and that the federal government can enforce that, I mean, abortion is a nationwide industry. There's all kinds of stuff that Congress regulates as being part of interstate commerce on flimsier grounds. And so, I think it's well within Congress's ability to regulate the abortion industry and the practice of abortion as a nationwide healthcare practice approved by ACOG, approved by national organizations, which receives different kinds of funding from state Medicaid programs. I mean, it's certain that receives, in some instances, even federal funding. It certainly seems like something that should be regulated by the federal government. So I think a lot of Republicans are taking this position of, I don't think this is something that the states should be involved in. And it's the same Republicans who voted for this kind of legislation when it didn't matter multiple times.
Yep.
There's a member of the House of Representatives, and there's one member of the House of Representatives who I really just want to blast him for this because he's voted on legislation to limit abortion like a gazillion times. Like pass a 20-week ban on abortion.
I'm not even sure who you're talking about. I'm very curious.
Oh, well,
in the House, not in the Senate?
House of Representatives.
Okay.
Where, like, when pressed on it, now that Roe is overturned, does not want to say if he's going to vote for this stuff. And and
is
he's
this
local.
a California one that I think
he is local?
Yes.
And I don't want. I'm not sure that I want to just blast him on the radio. But anyway, so they're retreating to this unprincipled federalism, and I feel like Trump is kind of doing that. Now, why?
So
I think it's more so because he just wants to say anything DeSantis is doing is bad.
So
if DeSantis said the sky was blue, he would say, no, actually it's green.
This is a popular podcast host in the state of Iowa, which many of you know is a early primary state. He was a big Ted Cruz backer. Steve Deace is his name. He was a huge Ted Cruz surrogate in the 2016 campaign. And this is what he said. He came on board with Trump. He was very strongly supportive of Trump during Trump's presidency, saying we appreciate all the good stuff he's doing. But he also was willing to call balls and strikes. He didn't completely abandon some of his concerns. So he said, and he's been a big fan of DeSantis up to this point. He said, if I had to guess what's going on with Trump and baby killing, it's that if he's the nominee, he plans on formally going with a, quote, let each state decide Stephen Douglas position. When he will assume every pro-life voter in the party of Lincoln will be desperate enough to win next year to tolerate that. But he knows he can't take that position in the primary, so he's chucking and ducking until then, but that's just my guess.
Right. Well, and this leads us to an interesting little episode with one of the more prominent pro-life advocacy organizations, the Susan B. Anthony List. So Trump makes this statement saying he's not going to support nationwide abortion legislation. A bunch of pro-lifers condemned this. Lila Rose condemned it, who's very influential in the pro-life world. Susan B. Anthony List comes out and condemns it. Then all of a sudden, Susan B. Anthony List gets a meeting with Trump. After the meeting, they come out and they issue a statement talking about all the wonderful things that Trump says he wants to do on the abortion question if he would be elected. Now, did Trump realize he stuck his foot? He stepped in it, and he needs to kind of clean up in order to get pro-lifers to back him? I don't know. Maybe. Is he sincere about it? I don't know. Here's my big fear, though. The Republican Party is all over the place right now on this position. We don't know what we want on a national level. Seems like half of Republicans are disagreeing with each other, and even the ones who do agree that we should do some kind of pro-life legislation, a lot of them are saying, let's just shoot for like a 15-week abortion ban or a 20-week abortion ban, something that would really limit very, very few abortions. The left, though, is at least the elected left. The Democrats who are in Congress, Democrats who are running for president. Well, at this point, there's only one Democrat running for president. Maybe there will be another. they're all in complete lockstep on what they should do, which is abolish the filibuster rule in the Senate as soon as Democrats get a majority in the House, the Senate, and the White House, and pass a nationwide bill making abortion legal for all 9 months of pregnancy for any reason nationwide. They have no qualms about it.
Nope.
They pack the Supreme Court in order to reinstitute Roe versus Wade. There are like 2 Democrats in all of Congress, practically, who don't support that position. It's pretty much just Joe Manchin. Kyrsten Sinema is not even formally a Democrat anymore. That's about it, right? I mean, to abolish the filibuster, there's 2 of them.
Yep, we were that close.
Yeah, I mean, we're desperately, dangerously close to having Roe v. Wade come back in the form of a piece of national legislation. I mean, if from January 2021 through January 2023, if Democrats had like 1 or 2 more seats in the Senate, they would have passed nationwide abortion. They would have reinstituted Roe v. Wade, more or less. And that's what I hate about the current Republican primary arguments and this squabbling between DeSantis and Trump over 6 weeks or this, or blah, 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 should we do nationwide abortion? Should we not? Like, we are completely, I shouldn't say we, the Republican Party anyway, pro-lifers, completely not unified. The pro-choice side, totally unified. They're coming into a gunfight with a gun, and we're coming into the gunfight with a squirt gun or with a knife. You know, I mean, we're at best a knife. Like we're completely. I feel as though the Republican Party is completely unequipped to deal with a post-Roe future and what nationwide abortion regulation should be or should look like. And that's the frustrating thing. I feel like it's a really bad situation with regards to nationwide abortion legislation. All right, we're going to dig more into this after the break. This is Right to Life Radio on Power Talk 96.7 AM 1400. A production, as always, of Right to Life of Central California, rtlcc.org. Back with Right to Life Radio. All right, Jonathan, as we're looking at the national picture of abortion and looking at the infighting between DeSantis and Trump over should the Republican Party, should the Republican Party's presidential nominee, this is a 501c3 compliant show here, folks. We don't endorse any candidates. Should the Republican Party's nominee endorse nationwide abortion legislation? Meanwhile, on the left, there's complete lockstep unanimity. And I think this is one of the interesting things about Joe Biden. This relates to Joe Biden being old. Joe Biden used to be much more moderate on abortion from the earlier point of his career through till today. Joe Biden used to be opposed to federal funding for abortion, changed his mind on it in 2019. He used to be fiercely opposed to even the very idea of packing the Supreme Court. Seems to have very much softened his view on that, seems to be much more open to it. Was at one point fiercely opposed to the idea of abolishing the filibuster rule in the Senate for any reason. Now, when there's the possibility of trying to codify Roe v. Wade via statute, seems to be open to abolishing the filibuster rule in the Senate. And, I can't read people's minds or anything, and I don't have a camera installed in 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue to know exactly what goes on in the Oval Office. Thank God for that. But this is kind of where I think the president being old is the most significant. It's more than just he looks bad in press conferences and slurs his speech and shuffles when he walks. I feel like the president's age has contributed to him being convinced by harder left-wing radicals within his own party, within his own administration, to adopt, and before that, in his campaign in 2020, into adopting harder and more extreme and more norm-violative policies in defense of abortion. and it's specifically in defense of abortion.
I think a lot of it, John, and I've heard this too, he may be more receptive to guidance, not from his party, but from his granddaughters.
Maybe.
Who are hard left progressives by all accounts.
Yeah. Well, and that's the thing, is Senator Joe Biden went on ad nauseum about how horrible it would be to abolish the filibuster in the Senate. Senator Biden talked about how FDR was the worst thing FDR ever did, to threaten to pack the Supreme Court, and what a terrible thing it was. It was one of the worst things ever. Senator Biden cited his deeply grounded Catholic faith for the reason why he opposed federal funding for abortion. And he's flip-flopped on all those positions. And I think a lot of people sort of attributed to, he's a politician. He's just, look at his finger, feel which way the wind is blowing. I sort of wonder more and more, because he keeps doing this with other kinds of issues, like even this 14th Amendment debate on the debt ceiling. Like, does he just get kind of pushed around by people who work for him? And is he so elderly he just kind of can't say no? I genuinely wonder that. And if you're going to say that's a horrible thing to say, he sets the record every single day for oldest president in American history. I feel like it's a legitimate question to ask, is if the man is too old. The vast majority of the country thinks he's too old to be president. Anyway, I'm just asking to be the fair, question, and it impacts our issue.
If the IRS is listening, I mean, President Trump would be the second oldest person to ever be elected.
He would also be the second oldest.
Just to be fair.
Just to be fair. All right, that'll do it for Right to Life Radio. We'll see you next time on Power Talk.